Good afternoon. How's everyone doing? All right, thanks, Carol. It is my great pleasure to introduce local designer and audio storyteller, Mr. Robb Mills, to talk to us about documentary sound design where subtlety meets significance. A few things about Robb that you did not read in his bio are he has a strong book recommendation called The Lady's Handbook for Her Mysterious Illness, a memoir by Sarah Ramey, again with a high recommendation that everyone should read it. If you could hang out with one fictional or cartoon character, it would be Winnie the Pooh, because Winnie is just so chill. Robb is currently inspired by musicians and sound and designers who push expectations while channeling beauty, a theme today, fun and connection, and recently worked on a film that was nominated for a 2021 Oscar documentary short, which you will hear more about. Again, welcome Robb from Bend, Oregon.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming. I just want to give a shout out, first of all, to the sound and video crew and to Renee and Martha and everybody behind the scenes who made all of this come together. So, a small round of applause. Thank you. So yes, documentary sound design where subtlety meets significance. Let's see what the first slide that shows up is going to be here. It's the title again, in case you forgot. So I'm going to be discussing in this talk about the experience I had last year working on the documentary Hunger Ward by filmmaker Skye Fitzgerald. In just sort of couching it not only in a before and after type of presentation of here's a scene before the sound treatment, here's the scene afterwards. The larger picture here was just the meaning and the impact that working on this film had on me, which is something I wanted to share with everybody else. And as you see on screen, the presentation does contain scenes of child starvation and death. It may be difficult for some to view. Before that scene comes up, I will give another notice so everybody's aware. So a bit about the film, documentary Hunger Ward. Created by filmmaker Skye Fitzgerald, was nominated for a 2021 Academy Award for a documentary short. Skye's prior film was a film called Lifeboat, which also was nominated for an Oscar for documentary short. And a little bit about it. It covers the civil war, which is still ongoing in Yemen. It's been going on for about 7 years now. It specifically highlights the work of two healthcare workers in two clinics in Yemen who are doing everything within their power to thwart the epidemic of child starvation due to a blockade that is preventing medical supplies and food supplies from entering the country. A few facts about the war. It's been going on for almost 7 years now. According to the UN, there's about 20 million people that are in desperate need of humanitarian aid at the moment. 4 million people are displaced. There's been 100,000 people killed. UNICEF just put out a statement this week stating that every 10 minutes, one child in Yemen passes away from a preventable cause. I'd never heard of any of this until I started working on the film. It's going on now. It doesn't get a lot of airtime. Let's back up. So the players and those involved in this talk and in the film, starting with myself. Again, my name is Robb Mills. I've been a sound designer and music composer for over 20 years, primarily for video games. I started out in Chicago doing audio post in television and radio. Got into video games around 1999, 2000. There's a few of the games I've worked on. I've worked on a bunch. And a lot of the titles that I worked on early on were film license titles. So a book would come out, a movie would come out, we would make the game. And there's a few of them up there. First Lord of the Rings game, Spiderwick Chronicles, Aragon. In 2008, I went freelance. A very smooth, strangely smooth transition into freelance. Started working on a very wide variety of game titles. The Dead Space titles you see on the right were adult science fiction horror games, contrasted with something like Leapfrog, which was, children's e-learning games. Sometimes I would work on two in the same day. I'd be working on Dead Space, cleanse my palate, start working on My Little Pony. If anybody drives a Tesla or knows somebody with one, there's some games preloaded on the console that you can play when you're sitting still, preferably. Beach buggy racing is one of those. If you look through the credits, you'll find my name. I did the sound effects in that game as well. And I bring this up just because video games and the work that I did for so long was the opposite of subtle. Games like big, they like epic, fantastic. So I spent, over a decade just creating large, fantastic sounds that were meant to be noticed, to push the envelope and to catch your attention. I had so much of that work that in 2015 I had a complete burnout situation. Very fortunate to have the work, but at the same time it was a bit much to handle, so I just threw my arms up one day and I was like, I can't do this anymore. My life has no balance. Every day was this monolithic block of work. Going to bed at midnight or 2 in the morning, getting up the next morning, going right back in the studio every day. I think it was 2014, I looked back at my planner and I had 2 weekends in the entire year where I hadn't worked, and decided that was just crazy. Threw up my hands, stopped doing audio work altogether. In 2015, my wife and I sold our house. I moved to Vancouver, BC, and I studied yoga therapy for 2 years. I didn't do any audio at all. Spent the time meditating, chanting, doing yoga, learning about health, learning about well-being, channeling that all back into myself, and it was wonderful. At the end of that, in 2017, we had sold our home. We had no place to live. Spent a few months trying to find a place to live, and we came to Bend one day in the middle of winter, and it was sunny, and that's all it took. Honestly, for those of you that are from the Pacific Northwest, that's a rare animal to see sun in February. So he literally drove here in the morning, decided we're moving here, and came here. But we didn't know anybody. I didn't know a single person in town. And having not worked for 2 years, work started to come back again. And I decided before it gets out of control again, I'm going to deliberately put my life back together the way I want it. I'm not going to let work become the only thing I do. So I set up some pillars that I needed. One of them was work. I had to pay rent, I had to eat, and I had some work. It was coming back and it was a comfortable amount. And I decided I need play. I need to put play into my life. So I started taking improv classes, something I'd never done, but it was fun, just being silly for silly's sake. I had work, I had play. What's another pillar? Service. Yeah, I decided that I needed something of service. I was convinced myself, and through my learning, that that was a way to live a happy life, was to do something where you were contributing to something bigger than yourself. So in 2018, I applied to, was accepted into, and graduated from the Deschutes County Search and Rescue team. So for 2.5 years, I volunteered as a search and rescue volunteer here in town. There's a big need for that here. There we go. Whoop, whoop, whoop. Chaos. I'm going to be the guy the battery dies on. Okay, we're going back to the beginning, everybody. Scrap everything I said. Okay, how and why I got involved. And it all directly ties into both improv and search and rescue. We were out doing an evidence search one day on search and rescue. And the way an evidence search works is you line up about a dozen people, shoulder to shoulder with about 10 feet in between each person. You look down and you begin to walk slowly across the field or whatever territory that you're in looking for evidence. So you have a lot of time to talk to the person that's next to you. So I was talking to my friend Kelly, staring down at the ground. How you doing, Kelly? How's life? How are things? And she tells me that her husband is executive producing a documentary about the civil war in Yemen. I was like, oh, that's really interesting. And she starts telling me about it. And I say, if he ever needs any audio work, let me know. That's kind of my gig. It's what I do. So she said she would tell him. And it turns out that I'd actually taken an improv class with her husband. So this is Michael Sherman on the left, who is the executive producer on Hunger Ward. He lives here in Bend. This is Skye Fitzgerald on the right. He is the director of the movie. So a couple months later, I get an email from Mike, and he's like, hey, I'd like to introduce you to Skye. My wife said you're interested in doing sound work in the film. He introduced me to Skye. Skye sends me an email, and he says, hey, he'd have done a couple documentaries already, been nominated for an Oscar. He's like, send me some examples of documentary work that you've done so we can see if this is going to work out. And it was at that point where I said, I don't have any. I've never done documentary work. I've done very little, if any, film work. But I've been doing audio for 20 years. I think I'm pretty good at it. I could probably make the shift. So just to make him feel better about it, I said, send me some scenes that you think need treatment. I'll do something to them, send them back. If you like them, we'll talk about moving forward. If not, nobody's worse off. So that's what he did. So the first scenes, he sent me a handful of scenes that he felt needed something, scenes that were missing something. He wasn't sure what, but he thought maybe audio could help with him. And one of the first scenes I looked at was the very opening scene of the movie. Grab a drink of water here just a second. So the opening scene, subtle sonic additions help establish the setting, provide foreshadowing, and build a little tension. So this is a drone shot that you're going to see that's above Sadaka Hospital in South Yemen. Opening scene of the movie, and he really liked the shot. It's beautifully done, but he felt it was missing something. So I'm going to play you the scene, first of all, as I received it. It's got the music in it, which is wonderful. But then I'll talk a little about the direction we went, and then I'll play you the next scene with the movie as it ended up in the movie. So I'm going to ask throughout this whole presentation that use your ears as you would normally use your eyes. Usually when we watch a movie, our eyes are taking everything in, the ears are getting it secondary. As we go through these scenes, really focus on what you're hearing, because that's kind of what this is about.
In Yemen, a civil war there has created a humanitarian disaster.
A conflict the UN calls the world's greatest humanitarian crisis.
A complex local power struggle that's becoming internationalized.
The United Nations blames coalition airstrikes for most of the civilian dead.
For every child killed by bombs and bullets, dozens are starving to death.
It's been nearly impossible for humanitarian aid to get into Yemen.
This could be the world's worst famine in 100 years.
And Skye sort of gave me the leeway to, do what you think needs to happen as a sound person. So I jumped in it as somebody who's been doing epic sci-fi fantasy video games for the past 20 years. And I thought, okay, what's our story? We're in the midst of a country amidst a civil war. This is an aerial shot coming down on a clinic. So I went to work adding gunshots, mortar fire, distant explosions, machine guns. Yeah, I thought that was the right thing to do. And I thought it sounded great. I like, wow, this is done really well. It sounded realistic. It fit with the scene. The reverb was right. Everything was all dialed in. And I sent it to Skye. I'm like, hey, what do you think? And his reaction in a nutshell was basically, we're at 11. We need to come to about 2. And I was like, oh, okay. Totally correct. Absolutely correct answer. But I was just sort of rolling with what I was used to doing. So I dialed it down to 2. I pulled some things out. I sent it to him. The next bit of feedback was, we're at 2, we need to come down to about 1. And that proceeded to come down to about 0.5. As it ended up in the final picture, there is one single instance of some automatic machine gun fire, which when I play you the next one, I'll sort of signal with my hand because you might miss it because it's very quiet. But it's perfect. There didn't need to be more than that. And this is something I would learn throughout the process of this film, that subtlety and small little movements and design choices are enough to tell the story. Another thing that I did with this scene that you're about to see is at the very end when it makes a jump shot to the very top of the hospital. Skye felt it needed something there. We were looking at the top of the hospital, the music's good, and we got the voiceover, but he felt it needed something. So I decided, it's a clinic, I know it's a clinic and a hospital, the audience doesn't know. What if we start bringing in the sounds that one might hear if they were in the clinic as we're getting closer to it? So we took some ventilator beep sounds, some crying sounds that were filmed on or recorded on location, and we mixed those in. So I'm going to play the scene again, and again, using your ears, listening to it, especially that final jump cut as we get close to the roof, and just notice if it feels any different as a scene.
In Yemen, a civil war there. in Yemen. A civil war there has created a humanitarian disaster.
A conflict the UN calls the world's greatest humanitarian crisis.
The complex local power struggle that's becoming internationalized.
The United Nations blames coalition airstrikes for most of the civilian dead.
For every child killed by bombs and bullets, dozens are starving to death.
It's been nearly impossible for humanitarian aid to get into Yemen.
This could be the world's worst famine in 100 years.
That feel different? Such a small little thing, such a small thing, but it really allowed the scene to tell its story. A little foreshadowing, a little identifying of what is in this building and things to come. So with some back and forth, we got there, and that went all right. He had sent a handful of scenes. I'm going to be showing you 5 scenes from the movie, from the documentary today, but there were about 20 that we went through and touched and changed the audio on and affected them. This is a scene at a funeral bombing, and sound design used to augment cell phone audio, amplify realism, and increase immersion. So this is a scene. There was an attendee at this funeral, which unfortunately was bombed multiple times by an airstrike while the people were attending the funeral. They were hit once, and then as they all began to evacuate, they were hit again. And this is immediately after the first bombing. One of the attendees pulled out his cell phone. You'll hear him describing it in the scene. He begins filming the shot with a cell phone. It was all okay, but it was filmed through a cell phone. We have the visual, we couldn't change that, but the sound was recorded through the mic of a cell phone. Our goal here was to, without fictionalizing the scene, without making it sound like something more than what it should be, just make it more immersive for the viewer. What would it sound like if you were actually there? How can we get the sound to a point where it's not limited by the technology of the cell phone it was recorded through? So I'm going to play the first scene with the original cell phone audio, and we're going to go right into the second scene with the augmented audio. Again, using the ears.
فوق رؤوسنا. وإذا بالصاروخ الأول يهبط. أخذت موبايلي وأنا أرى الناس وهم لا زالوا كثير من دول العالم سيعرف العالم مدى مظلومية الشعب اليمني. الله يحفظك لا رحمهم الله. ثلاث دقائق إلى 4 دقائق بالضبط كانت ما بين الصاروخ الأول.
Again, we're going to move into the scene with the designed sound, again, enhancing the immersion, bringing it to where it might be had it not been recorded through a cell phone, but not going overboard or fictionalizing.
فوق رؤوسنا. وإذا بالصاروخ الأول يهبط. وأنا أرى الناس وهم لا زالوا كثير من دول العالم سيعرف العالم مدى مظلومية الشعب اليمني. 3 دقائق إلى 4 دقائق بالضبط كانت ما بين الصاروخ الأول والصاروخ الثاني.
So again, trying to bring the impact that scene should have to it had it not been limited by the technology of the cell phone that was used to record it. Added in layers of twisting, breaking metal, concrete, what it would sound like if people were walking around in that hurried. I put special focus on the fire. When the fire becomes visible, you hear the fire. And also with headphones or through the speakers, you might notice, but it's also panning around as the cell phone is moving. Those sounds are also moving around. Just really trying to make an immersive experience because it deserves it. So after going through a few scenes like that one, we were on a roll. We finally started to kind of understand how we were supposed to approach these things. That was about as big and as designed as we get. Everything else is going to continue with the idea of very subtle additions to sound to help these scenes tell their story. I began going through the film scene by scene, and we kept an Excel sheet that we would trade notes with on and off. Skye was in Portland, I was here in Bend. I watched the movie scene by scene as a sound person, noticing areas where I'm like, ooh, that's quiet. That could sound better. I feel like that's kind of vacuous, it's missing something. I would catalog all of these and he would go over them, and he kind of gave me free rein. He's like, if you think it needs it and you have the time, do it. I'll look at it and thumbs up or thumbs down it later. So this was another one of those scenes which seemed very significant to me. This is featuring a little girl who is prominent in the film named Abir. Abir is 6 years old and she weighs 15 pounds. And this is a scene where we see her eating in the clinic. She's given a bowl of fruit and she's eating some apples and some oranges. And because of the limitations of how this was filmed, it was Skye and his assistant in Yemen at the time. They were the entire film crew. And you're filming a documentary about human drama, so when things happen, you get the camera out, you film it. You might not be as close as you'd like to be. You probably don't have a microphone at the ready. Maybe the mic is on the camera and you're zooming the camera in 30 feet to get, whatever it is you're trying to film. And that was sort of the situation through the whole film, as the sound suffered, or they got as best you could because of those technical limitations. So I saw this scene and there's this 6-year-old child who's 15 pounds and she's eating. I don't know what could be more significant. So as I watched it and you could not hear her eating, that was a major flag to me that this needed to be treated. So we're using sound design in this scene to recreate natural sounds that weren't captured on site due to technical limitations. So I'm going to play the first scene with just the natural sound as I first saw it.
مشبعين تمام ايوه عبير هي تحتاج نظام غذائي معين وهذا شيء طبيعي على انها تتحسس من ماده القمح لان الاسره الان لا يوجد مع.
So I'm going to play the scene again. This time I'm going to play it with only the sounds that I created and synced with picture. So no location sound, this is just the sounds I created in my studio to sync with the picture. Might have noticed I added a little balloon hit in there too. Also significant that a child is eating, but there's also a child playing. Definitely felt as though that needed the respect of having some sound in there. So here's the scene with the location sound and the sound I created mixed in.
كلنا مشبعين تمام. ايوه عبير، هي تحتاج نظام غذائي معين، وهذا شيء طبيعي على انها تتحسس من ماده القمح، لان الاسره الان لا يوجد مع.
So small and significant sounds, small subdued sounds with significant results. So again, finding our way through the scenes and finding a way of working together in ways that again were a little challenging with me at first. I had not done a lot of film work, so I had to kind of learn to speak film, especially working with their audio editor and the person who was doing the mixing up in Portland. I was not using Adobe Premiere or Final Cut Pro, so he couldn't just send me his projects and me open it up. I'm one of like 3 people in the world who use the audio software that I do, unfortunately. So I had to find ways of sending assets that they could easily line up with scenes without using time code and without sharing our applications. But it all worked out. We managed to do it well. And this is another scene that we came across where it was sort of a reoccurring motif through the film, this motive of cleansing or washing away. And the need to reconstruct those sounds because they also met those limitations due to the way it was filmed. After a passing of a child or a tragic scene, there's been this motive of cleansing, like people cleaning the floors. In 2 of the scenes, it's somebody squeegeeing the floor with water. In another scene, it's a man sweeping a floor. The sounds are very faint in the natural sound, but they definitely sounded like they could be closer. And I also felt it was very important that we hear the water from the squeegee. Water has this idea of cleansing. It's representative of tears, things that seem to fit in well with this movie. So I'm going to show this next clip. This is of the natural sound, the way I received it. This is 3 different scenes that I've edited together into one. Again, this is just the natural sound without the added created sound. The next scene is going to be, let me skip through here, with the added sounds that I created, recorded in my garage. I poured water all over my garage floor. I put on my flip-flops, got a squeegee and began to record, and then began to pull out the parts that I felt would mix really well with the film and the visuals. And again, using your ears, just noticing the difference in the scenes. So soft, subtle footsteps and the flip-flops in the water. Just little tiny moments of hearing the curling of that water as it gets close to the camera, and then the sweeping of the broom, just enhancing that motif of cleansing or even tears. So we're moving at a pretty good clip at this point, and the working relationship it was always good, but I kind of felt like I was starting to learn for myself how to approach these. And I just thought this was a little fun. Regarding that squeegee clip, this is an email that I had sent to Skye as we were moving through the film. Hi Skye, I'm making some progress. I'm just going through the entire film beginning to end and hitting our list in order. Actively in the process of acquiring a large floor squeegee so I can create some Foley sounds for Squeegee Man. To which Skye replied, anytime a collaborator writes that they're actively pursuing a squeegee in order to complete the task, I know we're on the right track. And we were. It was, things were going swimmingly. This will be the final scene that I show from the movie today. The scene for CPR. Again, this is the one mentioned at the beginning with an warning this can be very difficult to watch. Yeah, we'll leave it to that. It can be a little gut-wrenching. It's hard for me sometimes, even after seeing it, I don't know how many times. Using subtle sound design to reproduce accurate and immersive sounds for an emotional scene. So again, I'm going to play the scene as I received it. And the focus of this movie, the focus of this scene is body movement. You're going to see two nurses working to resuscitate a small child. A woman walks in at the beginning. They're working sort of urgently to apply CPR to this child. And it's completely lacking in movement sounds. A situation where the camera was zoomed in close, no way to capture the actions of these two healthcare workers as they were working on this child. So the first sound with only the natural sound. First scene, rather. Okay, so again, lots of movement from the bodies, the workers, the moving of the medical equipment, handling of the child's body. To me, that all needed to be there, and it wasn't captured in the originally. So I'm going to play the scene again with just the sounds that I created in my studio to synchronize with the picture. Being a SAR volunteer and I was on the medical team, I had a stethoscope. I actually had a hand ventilator bag with me, which I was able to use for those scenes. Even adding things like the small sound of the fly landing on the child's hand at the end seemed very necessary. Here's the final scene. I was looking for meaningful work, and I found it, definitely. Sorry, looking for meaningful work, and I found it, most definitely, in this work, in this documentary. For me, this was an addition to my pillar of service, to use my time and talents to something that resonated with my values, something that I thought was important, and as a message and as a story, it needed to get out to the world. And as designers, we all want our ideas to stand out, because when they stand out, they get noticed. I'd been doing that for decades with the game industry and the sounds and the music that I was writing and creating for those stories. But this work really made me think, what do you do when your work isn't meant to be noticed? What do you do when the work is meant to fill in a hole or reside in the background or maybe complete the picture in a very subtle or almost unrecognizable way? And it made me think we often design like this on the left. Someone tells us to create something, so we roll out the high contrast, super colorful, exciting parrot. But sometimes we need that owl. There's a hole in that tree, and that owl is filling that space, but it's drawing very little attention to itself. And this is sort of the realization that I came to with the work I did on this film. And I decided, you know what I'm doing? I'm creating sonic camouflage. Just like a camouflage outfit or a jacket someone in the military might wear to not be noticed in their environment. It's exactly what I was doing with the sound. And I imagine that's got to transfer into visual settings as well, or written, or any type of creative endeavor. So being in the environment, taking up the space in the environment, but drawing as little attention to yourself as possible. And a big lesson for me throughout this film was I started to approach it with using the film as a medium for me to show my sounds, and through Skye's decisions and wisdom to tone everything down from 11 to 2, 2 to 1, 1 to 0.5. Instead of me using the film to showcase my sounds, I was using the film. I'm trying. I had this memorized before. It was the other way around. Yeah, I was acting in service to the film, as opposed to the film being a means to showcase my work. And that was humbling, and I'm so glad I learned that lesson. Because ultimately one sees what's most important for the whole, for the greater good of the project, not necessarily to showcase your work. And I learned that subtle does not mean easy or uncreative. These were subtle, small, understated sounds, but some of the scenes were not easy at all. The scene with administering CPR to the child, the scene where she's compressing his chest with her thumbs, what would that sound like? It probably made no sound in real life, but we needed a little something here to help convey that urgency and sense of movement. I tried many different things, stacks of towels, pillowcases. I tried a partially deflated basketball, so many different things, and I would send all of these to Skye, 4, 5, 6 different iterations, and he would send back, he's like, okay, I think we need number 4. And I was like, okay, number 4 is the one with pillows with 2 blankets and a plastic sheet under it or something, but all these different ways to try and find something that really fit with the film. There was another scene where a nurse helps a small child up out of bed, and the little girl is wearing this sort of chiffon taffeta kind of pink frilly shirt. And I sent the scene with some treatment of moving the child, and Skye's feedback was, the cloth sounds too heavy. That doesn't sound like what she's wearing. And I looked at it and I'm like, yeah, you're right, it is too heavy. I might have used a pillowcase or something that was just too thick. But it was that level of detail we were going for. It has to be camouflage. It has to be invisible. Necessary, but at the same time not drawing too much attention to itself, or then you're starting to fictionalize things and you're taking people out of the experience. So once the film work was done and it was mixed, this was so important to me, I just continued to do volunteer work with the outreach team for the film. I spent dozens of hours contacting senators and congressional representatives just to raise awareness of the film. Sitting on LinkedIn, tracking down the legislative directors of all these Congress people and senators, sending personal emails to each one of them, with links to the film or inviting them to private screenings, just trying to get the word out. That was the point of making the film, to get the story out. So I became politically active, and again, it felt good. There was just so much momentum from doing the film, I didn't want to quit. So the call to action, and maybe you do this kind of work already, maybe you've found stuff that you work on that does resonate with your values, and is deeply interesting to you and you feel good about it. But if you don't, I would recommend that you try it at some point in your career, sooner or later. If you can work it in, just seek out work that is meaningful to you. And don't be afraid to dip your toes into new waters. I had to write Skye back and tell him I don't have any experience. Sorry, send me some stuff, we'll try it out. Defining wealth in different ways. I did this entire project for free, as did the rest of the crew. This was a labor of love and a labor of importance. But defining wealth in different ways, it's not always about the money. It's how good do you feel about the work you did, and what good do you think it's doing for those who are going to watch it, or those in it. And the work that resonates with your values will always be worthwhile. And it can be challenging, definitely acknowledge that, but it's possible. And I love this quote from Katharine Hepburn: if you always do what interests you, at least one person is pleased. Good old Katharine Hepburn. And as I mentioned, some of the challenges that I went through, I did it for free. This was months of work that I worked in between other projects. Never once did I regret having to sit down at my desk and start working on this. I had no experience with documentary film, and it required me a new way of approaching my craft. Again, going from here and just scaling things way down, having to be fine with the final mix coming back and the volume is much lower than I would have wanted it, because hey, that's my stuff. It's not out in front. But I learned to appreciate that, and I learned to realize that that was absolutely the right way to go. And required new ways of collaborating, being long distance, me not being familiar with film, me getting them what they needed so they could adequately review the work I was doing and then send feedback. And as a final take, and there were a lot of poignant scenes in the film, but something was missing in every one of them that prevented those scenes from having the impact that they should have had. And by doing small little things, it gave those scenes what they needed to tell their story. Maybe that was just soft sounds of flip-flops in water, or a little curling of a wave as the squeegee comes close to the screen, and the urgency of body movements in cloth as the nurses are moving a child around, peeling a piece of orange open, putting it in the mouth and chewing it. Small, understated, not exciting sounds, but they gave the scenes the impact that they needed. And interestingly, all the work I had done before that was huge, was big. I was writing full orchestral scores for video games. I got a BAFTA nomination for one of them. Every sound that I was doing was gigantic and big and powerful, and I was working on titles that sold millions of copies, but none of them were as meaningful or as fulfilling than the work that I did on this quiet project. It had a major impact on me. So by pulling back and doing the subtle work, mostly unrecognized work, within a project that is meaningful, had a huge impact on me. Which just brings us full circle, or more than full circle, that subtlety can be significant, and that's what I experienced here. If anybody's interested, figure out how to watch Hunger Ward or even get involved, you can go to hungerward.org. That's the conclusion of my talk. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Wasn't that great? I wanted to share a story. Heather Crank. Heather, are you here? Everything at the back? Heather's known Robb and recommended Robb speak. So first of all, Heather's been involved with Ben Design since its inception and helped curate great programming and has always spoke very highly of Robb. And when I called him this year, he was a little surprised. He said, "Why would you want me there?" And I was sharing a story with him that I had just produced a TV spot, and one of my coworkers wanted to change the music. And I said, well, I didn't even notice the music. So I was asking Robb's opinion. Is that a good thing or a bad thing that I didn't notice the music? And he said, it's a good thing, because it was subtle. It wasn't, when you go to a film and you hear music and it's so incredibly loud and you're like, oh, that's too loud. So I love the subtle does not mean easy or uncreative, and I think you demonstrated that so well in this hard to watch, painful film, especially the scenes of the little girl eating the fruit. That wasn't really a question, that was just a statement and a compliment. So.
Appreciated, thank you.
But it came full circle for me in our beginning conversation and how you communicate that in your talk, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
One question I have for you: Are you working on games again, or what are you working on right now?
I am currently back in games. Do you have any gamers here?
We got some.
Anybody know Guild Wars 2? It's an MMO. I'm working with Guild Wars 2 right now, so I'm back into the fantasy, magic spells, big exploding things. So yeah, it's fun. It's fun work.
Are there any plans for other documentaries, films?
I hope so. It's interesting. I was just contacted 2 weeks ago by the sound mixer who did the mixing work on this film. He was working on another one related to the Keystone Pipeline, and he asked me if I had time to do the treatment that I did on this film with that film. But it happened in the middle of a life storm, health issues with family and other things, and I couldn't do it. But so it was hard to say no. I did say yes because I'm a bit of a maniac. I'm like, sure, I'll not sleep, I'll do it. But it just wouldn't work out with the schedule. But I definitely have my eyes open and ears open for these type of opportunities in the future. So.
Anyone has a film? Call Rob. I mean, it's kind of interesting that your very first film is nominated for an Oscar. Can you share with us what that experience was like?
You know, I was thinking as I was going through talking points of this film that I wouldn't have cared. It's nice. I'm very proud for Skye and the executive producer and the people. It's wonderful for them. It looks good on my website to have that, but as far as a feeling goes, I would be proud of it regardless of where it went. If it went nowhere, that would upset me. But the fact that we got it out, the fact that it went to representatives, the fact that the first week in office, that President Biden actually made a statement about the civil war in Yemen that they were going to look into scaling back their support for the Saudi-led coalition, which is one of the major contributors to the catastrophe that's going on there. I'd like to think that maybe some of the outreach in the film that we were sending into representatives had an effect on that. Mm-hmm. Again, yeah, it's nice, and I'm proud for Skye, but I would have been very happy either way. I don't know if it would change it.
Yeah. Have any of you seen the film? It just screened at Bend Film. And where's it available if someone wants to go to the website?
It was actually picked up for distribution by MTV. They have a streaming website, so it's available there, I know. The Paramount Pictures streaming website, it can be watched there as well. I believe that's a subscription service. And those are the two that I'm aware of right now. Again, if you go to hungerward.org, that will have information on where it can be viewed, as well as information if anyone feels like contributing money, which would go directly to the clinic that was featured in the documentary.
Earlier we talked about, or when I introduced you, said that you were inspired by music. So I'm curious if you do distinguish between music and sound, and how has your experience as a sound designer influenced your view of music?
Part one, yes, I do distinguish between sound design and music. And it's sort of fascinating. I've done an equal amount of both. I consider sound design like a craft. Like if you were a cabinet maker or you manufactured some tactile something. That's the way I view sound design. You're taking blocks and pieces and stacking them together in an interesting way. I view writing music as almost a form of modern day magic. Like there's something about it where I'll write a piece of music and look back on it when it's done and I'm like, where'd that come from? Wow, they're both very creative processes, but there's something kind of craftworky about sound design. And music, it just still sort of got this magic is the best word I can use for it. It's like, where did it come from? Almost like you're channeling it. And of course, there's craft to making music as well, but there's a certain joy in music because you're creating something that people who don't write music, they're like, wow, I don't understand that. How'd you do that? Again, there's almost something magical and mysterious about it. And I view it that way myself. The second half of the question was?
How has your experience as a sound designer influenced your view of music?
That they both complement each other. That when you create sound design and you know there's going to be music present, or vice versa, if you're writing music and you know there's going to be sounds present, you can't create one in a vacuum. You can get lucky and do that, but if you're really paying attention and doing your job, you have to be aware of what is going to be under or over that music, or under or over the sounds that you're playing, and you want the two to mix together very well. There's a spot on my website that I did this past year where the client had chosen the music track. It's a full motion graphics animated spot, and I decided to create all of the sound from synthesizers. I wasn't going to record anything. There was going to be no natural organic sound. Everything was going to be created from a synth. And I listened to the music track the entire time I was doing that. So if I made a sound, a blip, or a little type of a pop or explosion, it was all keyed to the music. I designed it to fit in seamlessly with the music. And when we sent it to be mixed, the person that was mixing it contacted me. He was like, I was having so much trouble because I would hear something and I would go to turn the sound on and realize, oh, it was in the music. Or I would hear something in the music and I would go to adjust that and realize, oh, wait, no, that's in your sound. So they were just meshed together. So that was fun. So yeah, just an awareness of each one as you're doing the others.
And the role they play.
Yeah.
Okay, last question. You talked about improv. I've also done improv. Did you do the class where you always have to start with yes?
Of course.
Yes.
That's the golden rule. Yes, and?
Yes, and?
I failed.
Yes, I know. I would say, but no.
Yes, and it was wonderful.
So you've talked about improv and search and rescue. Anything else that outside the studio that inspires your work inside the studio?
Other people's work. Yeah, there's just the creatives that you come across, no matter what they work on, where sometimes it just blows your mind. You know, you're listening or watching or reading the same things over and over, and then every so often something comes out that just resonates with you in a way that it opens up your idea, your vocabulary of what that medium could be. You're like, what? Who created this music? Aliens? This is amazing. It's beautiful and it's strange, and it's wonderful. So yeah, just other people's work. And I don't actively search for it. I don't sit down with a pile of music or visual videos or reading and be like, I'm going to look for something that resonates with me. You know, these things just happen to you when you least expect it. So those are wonderful little moments.
Thank you very much. Thank you for giving your heart and your talent to this film. It's so important. And for inspiring all of us. I saw a lot of people take a photo of the slide. I can't remember what it's called right now, but...
Subtlety does not equal easy.
Well, there was another one about some of the lessons or challenges you learned, so I know it meant a lot. So thank you very much for being here. And now, do you agree you should have been here?
Sure. Well, ask them. I don't know. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. We'll be back in a few minutes for our last presenter of the day. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you, everybody.